The screech of tires against concrete echoed through the Desert Ridge Mall parking garage as I sprinted toward the black SUV, my security radio crackling with emergency codes. The woman being dragged toward the vehicle was fighting with everything she had, her designer heels scraping against the asphalt as two men in dark clothing tried to force her inside. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I didn't think about the consequences or my own safety. I just ran. What I didn't know was that saving Emma Rodriguez that Tuesday evening would unravel everything I thought I knew about my past and completely transform my future. The woman I pulled from the hands of those kidnappers wasn't just another victim. She was my ex-wife's sister, the billionaire tech mogul whose family had written me off as worthless years ago. And somehow, in the chaos of that moment, we would discover that sometimes the most unlikely connections can heal the deepest wounds. William Chen adjusted his security badge one more time as he began his evening rounds through Desert Ridge Mall, the familiar weight of his radio and flashlight providing comfort in the routine that had defined his life for the past 3 years. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had learned to find dignity in honest work, despite the judgmental glances from shoppers who saw only a uniform rather than the devoted father working 2 jobs to support his 8-year-old daughter. The mall was winding down from another busy Tuesday, with store employees pulling down metal gates and the last customers making their way to the parking garage. William's shift would continue until midnight, but he didn't mind the long hours. Every paycheck brought him closer to his goal of saving enough for Sophie's art supplies, and maybe even private lessons with the instructor at the community center who had recognized his daughter's exceptional talent. Sophie Chen was the light of William's world, a bright and creative 8-year-old who saw beauty in everything around her. While other children her age were glued to tablets and video games, Sophie spent her free time sketching elaborate drawings of fantastical worlds and painting watercolor landscapes that seemed far too sophisticated for someone so young. Her art teacher, Mrs. Anderson, had mentioned several times that Sophie possessed a rare gift that deserved nurturing, but private art instruction was expensive, and William's salary as a security guard barely covered their basic needs. Their small apartment in the Willow Creek complex wasn't much to look at, with its worn carpet and outdated appliances, but William had worked hard to make it a home filled with love and encouragement. The walls were covered with Sophie's artwork, creating a gallery of childhood imagination that visitors often remarked upon with genuine amazement. Every evening after school, Sophie would spread her art supplies across the tiny dining table, working on new projects while William prepared their simple dinner and helped with homework. The divorce from Maria had been finalized 4 years ago, leaving William with full custody of Sophie and a bitter understanding of how quickly love could turn to resentment when financial pressure mounted. Maria had grown tired of their modest lifestyle, dreaming of the wealth and status that her family had always expected her to achieve. When she left, she had made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with the responsibilities of parenthood, choosing instead to pursue a new life that didn't include the complications of a struggling ex-husband and a young daughter. What Maria had never told William during their marriage was the full extent of her family's wealth and influence. He knew her sister Emma was successful in business, but the details had always been vague, and Maria seemed embarrassed by her own middle-class existence compared to her sister's achievements. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. It wasn't until after the divorce that William learned through casual conversation with neighbors that Emma Rodriguez was actually the CEO of one of Arizona's most successful renewable energy companies, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The knowledge stung not because of the money itself, but because it highlighted how Maria's family had viewed him as beneath their standards. During the brief times he had met Emma at family gatherings, she had been polite but distant, treating him with the kind of courtesy that wealthy people reserved for service workers. There had never been open hostility, but the message was clear enough. William Chen, with his community college education and blue-collar background, was not the kind of man they had envisioned for Maria. As William completed his rounds through the upper level of the mall, checking that all stores were properly secured, he thought about the art contest that Sophie had entered at school. The winner would receive a scholarship to attend a prestigious summer art camp, an opportunity that could open doors for his daughter that he could never afford to provide on his own. Sophie had worked for weeks on her submission, a detailed painting of a phoenix rising from desert flames that had left even William speechless with its beauty and symbolism. The irony wasn't lost on him that his daughter had chosen to paint a phoenix, the mythical bird that rose from its own ashes to begin anew. Sometimes William felt like he was still waiting for his own moment of rebirth, still searching for the opportunity that would allow him to provide Sophie with everything she deserved. He loved his work and took pride in keeping people safe, but he couldn't ignore the growing awareness that his current path had limitations that might prevent Sophie from reaching her full potential. As he made his way toward the parking garage to begin the final security check of his shift, William had no idea that the next few minutes would change everything he thought he knew about second chances, family connections, and the unexpected ways that courage could transform ordinary lives into extraordinary stories. The screech of tires against concrete shattered the evening quiet as William stepped into the parking garage, his hand instinctively reaching for his radio. What he saw made his blood run cold. Two men in dark clothing were dragging a woman toward a black SUV, her struggles growing weaker as she fought against their grip. The woman's expensive clothing and jewelry caught the harsh fluorescent lights, but it was her terrified expression that galvanized William into action. Without hesitation, he sprinted across the concrete floor, his heavy work boots echoing through the garage as he shouted for the men to stop. The kidnappers looked up in surprise, clearly not expecting interference from mall security. The larger of the two men released his grip on the woman and turned toward William, reaching inside his jacket for what was undoubtedly a weapon. William's military training from his brief stint in the National Guard kicked in as he closed the distance between them. He tackled the armed man before the gun could clear its holster, sending both of them crashing into the side of a parked sedan. The impact knocked the wind out of William, but adrenaline kept him moving as he grappled for control of the weapon. The second kidnapper maintained his hold on the woman, while shouting at his partner to hurry up. She took advantage of his momentary distraction to drive her elbow into his ribs, breaking free just long enough to stumble several steps away. Her escape attempt was short-lived as the man recovered quickly, lunging forward to recapture her. William managed to pin the armed man's weapon hand against the concrete, using his body weight to prevent the gun from being aimed in his direction. The struggle was brief but intense, with both men fighting desperately for control. A sharp crack echoed through the garage as the kidnapper's wrist bent at an unnatural angle, forcing him to release the pistol with a howl of pain. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as other mall employees and shoppers began to respond to the commotion. The second kidnapper realized their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. He released the woman and sprinted toward the SUV, shouting for his injured partner to follow. The armed man stumbled to his feet, cradling his damaged wrist, and managed to reach the vehicle just as it began moving toward the exit. William pushed himself up from the concrete, his uniform torn and his left shoulder throbbing from the impact with the car. He immediately turned his attention to the woman, who had collapsed against a concrete pillar, her entire body shaking from the trauma of the attempted abduction. As he approached her, something about her face seemed familiar, though he couldn't immediately place where he might have seen her before. Emma Rodriguez looked up at her rescuer, with a mixture of gratitude and shock that went beyond the normal reaction to being saved from kidnappers. The security guard who had risked his life for a complete stranger was someone she recognized, though the context seemed impossible. This was William Chen, the man her sister Maria had married and divorced, the father of her niece Sophie, whom she had barely acknowledged during their few brief family encounters. The recognition was mutual but delayed, as both of them processed the surreal nature of their reunion under such dramatic circumstances. William's first concern was Emma's physical condition, checking for injuries and trying to help her regain her composure while they waited for police and paramedics to arrive. It wasn't until she spoke his name that the full impact of the situation hit him. The police interview process took nearly 2 hours, with both William and Emma providing detailed statements about the attempted kidnapping. Detective Rodriguez, who shared Emma's surname but was no relation, explained that this appeared to be a targeted crime rather than a random abduction. Emma's position as CEO of a major renewable energy company made her a potential target for various criminal enterprises, from corporate espionage to ransom schemes. As the immediate crisis subsided and the parking garage began to return to normal, William found himself alone with Emma for the first time since her rescue. The conversation that followed was awkward initially, weighted down by years of family history and the dramatic circumstances that had brought them together. Emma's gratitude was genuine and profound, but there was also an underlying tension that spoke to their complicated past. Emma explained that she had been working late at her downtown office, reviewing contracts for a major solar installation project that would bring renewable energy to several rural communities throughout Arizona. The parking garage where she was attacked was not her usual location, but she had been meeting with a potential investor at the upscale restaurant on the mall's top level. The kidnappers had clearly been watching her movements, waiting for an opportunity when she would be vulnerable and isolated. William listened to her explanation while processing his own complex emotions about the encounter. This was the same woman who had treated him with polite disdain during family gatherings, who had made it clear through subtle gestures and comments that she considered him beneath her sister's social status. Yet seeing her vulnerable and terrified had awakened his protective instincts without hesitation, proving that his fundamental character remained unchanged regardless of their history. The conversation gradually shifted from the immediate events to more personal topics as they waited for Emma's security team to arrive and escort her home. She asked about Sophie with what seemed like genuine interest, admitting that she regretted not maintaining a closer relationship with her niece after the divorce. William found himself sharing details about Sophie's artistic talents and his struggles to provide her with adequate opportunities to develop her gifts. Emma's reaction to learning about Sophie's art was more emotional than William had expected. She revealed that she had always been interested in supporting young artists, having established a scholarship foundation several years earlier that provided funding for underprivileged children to pursue creative education. The irony that her own niece might benefit from such a program while Emma remained disconnected from her life was not lost on either of them. As Emma's security team arrived to escort her to her vehicle, she surprised William by asking if she could visit Sophie sometime soon. The request was tentative, acknowledging the complicated family dynamics that had kept them apart, but there was a sincerity in her voice that suggested the evening's events had affected her more deeply than just the trauma of being attacked. William agreed to the visit, though he wasn't entirely sure what motivated his decision. Perhaps it was seeing Emma's vulnerability during the attack, or maybe it was the genuine interest she had shown in Sophie's artistic development. Whatever the reason, he found himself giving her his phone number and accepting her invitation to bring Sophie to visit her art foundation's gallery the following weekend. The drive home through Phoenix's quiet streets gave William time to process everything that had happened. He had started the evening as a security guard completing routine rounds, and he was ending it as the man who had saved one of Arizona's most prominent businesswomen from kidnapping. More significantly, he had reconnected with a family member who had previously been little more than a distant figure in his and Sophie's lives. When he arrived at their apartment, Sophie was already asleep, her latest artwork still spread across the dining table where she had been working before her babysitter arrived. William stood in the doorway of her room, watching her peaceful expression and wondering how tonight's events might change their lives. The woman he had saved was Sophie's aunt, someone with the resources and connections to provide opportunities that William could never afford on his security guard salary. Yet he also couldn't ignore the nagging concern about what Emma's sudden interest in their lives might mean for the stability and independence he had worked so hard to build. Sophie had grown up without her mother's family's involvement, and William had learned to be both father and mother to his daughter. The thought of allowing wealthy relatives back into their lives brought both hope and anxiety about maintaining the values and closeness that defined their relationship. As he prepared for bed, William realized that saving Emma Rodriguez had been the easy part of the evening. The real challenge would be navigating the complex family dynamics and social differences that had driven them apart in the first place, while protecting Sophie from potential disappointment if Emma's interest proved to be temporary or conditional. The events in the parking garage had lasted less than 5 minutes, but William suspected their consequences would reshape his and Sophie's lives in ways he was only beginning to understand. The following Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Arizona sunshine that made everything seem possible. William stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his collar for the third time, while Sophie bounced excitedly in the living room, clutching her art portfolio against her chest. Emma had called twice during the week to confirm their visit to the Rodriguez Foundation's gallery, and each conversation had felt increasingly natural, as if the trauma of the parking garage had somehow dissolved years of family tension. Sophie had spent the entire week preparing for the visit, carefully selecting her best artwork and practicing the presentation she planned to give about each piece. William watched his daughter's enthusiasm with a mixture of pride and protective concern. He had seen Sophie disappointed before when promises from adults fell through, and he couldn't bear the thought of Emma's interest proving to be merely temporary guilt over their family estrangement. The drive to the Rodriguez Foundation took them through neighborhoods that gradually transformed from working-class apartment complexes to affluent residential areas with manicured lawns and expensive cars. Sophie pressed her face against the passenger window, commenting on the elaborate architecture and asking questions about how people afforded such magnificent homes. William tried to explain the concepts of different careers and education levels without making their own circumstances sound inadequate or temporary. The foundation building itself was a stunning example of modern architecture, with floor-to-ceiling windows and clean lines that spoke of both prosperity and artistic sensibility. A sculpture garden surrounded the entrance, featuring works by local artists that seemed to dance in the morning sunlight. Sophie's eyes widened as she took in the outdoor gallery, already identifying techniques and styles she recognized from her art books. Emma met them at the entrance, dressed casually in jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than William's monthly rent, but her smile was warm and genuine as she greeted Sophie with enthusiasm that seemed completely authentic. The awkwardness that had characterized their previous interactions was replaced by something that felt like genuine family connection, though William remained cautiously optimistic about the sustainability of this new dynamic. The gallery tour that followed exceeded even Sophie's elevated expectations. Emma proved to be a knowledgeable and passionate guide, explaining not just the technical aspects of the artwork, but also the stories behind each piece and the artists who had created them. Sophie listened with rapt attention, asking sophisticated questions that impressed both adults and demonstrated her intuitive understanding of artistic expression. When they reached the children's wing of the gallery, Sophie's excitement became almost overwhelming. The space was designed specifically to showcase young artists, with proper lighting and professional mounting that treated their work with the same respect given to established masters. Emma explained that the foundation provided scholarships and mentorship opportunities for talented young people who might otherwise never have access to quality artistic education. The conversation that followed revealed the extent of Emma's commitment to supporting young artists. She had personally funded the education of over 50 children during the past 5 years, many of whom had gone on to attend prestigious art schools and launch successful careers. The foundation also operated mobile art studios that visited underserved communities, bringing supplies and instruction directly to children who couldn't travel to traditional classes. Sophie's portfolio review took place in Emma's private office, a space that balanced professional elegance with personal touches that spoke to her genuine love of art. As Emma examined each of Sophie's pieces, her expressions shifted from polite interest to genuine amazement. The sophistication of the 8-year-old's technique and the emotional depth of her subject matter were clearly beyond what Emma had expected, even after William's descriptions of his daughter's abilities. The conversation about Sophie's potential and the opportunities available through the Foundation's programs was interrupted by the arrival of Emma's business associate, David Park, who had come to discuss urgent matters related to a major solar energy project. William couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in Emma's demeanor as she transitioned from aunt to CEO, her posture straightening and her voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to making million-dollar decisions. David's reaction to finding William and Sophie in Emma's office was politely professional, but William detected the same subtle condescension he had experienced from Maria's family during their marriage. The unspoken question hung in the air about why the billionaire CEO was spending her Saturday morning with a security guard and his daughter, instead of focusing on business matters that demanded her attention. The tension became more apparent when David mentioned that several board members had expressed concerns about Emma's recent security incident and whether it indicated a need for her to maintain a lower public profile. The implication was clear that associating with people outside her usual social circle might create additional security risks or public relations complications that could affect the company's reputation. Emma's defense of her choices was immediate and firm, but William could see the strain that the conversation was creating. The professional pressure she faced as one of the most successful women in Arizona's business community was enormous, and every personal decision was subject to scrutiny from colleagues, board members, and media observers who monitored her activities for signs of weakness or poor judgment. The visit concluded with Emma's promise to enroll Sophie in the Foundation's Advanced Youth Program, which would provide weekly private instruction with professional artists, as well as access to supplies and exhibition opportunities. The scholarship would cover all costs and even include transportation to and from their apartment, removing every financial barrier that had previously prevented Sophie from accessing quality art education. The drive home was filled with Sophie's excited chatter about the gallery, the other young artists she had met, and her plans for the advanced program. William found himself genuinely grateful for Emma's generosity, while simultaneously concerned about the complex dynamics that her involvement in their lives might create. The gulf between their social and economic circumstances remained vast, and he worried about Sophie becoming accustomed to opportunities that might not always be available. That evening, as William helped Sophie organize her art supplies and prepare for the week ahead, he received a phone call that would test his resolve and force him to confront the true cost of accepting help from Emma's world. Detective Martinez from the Phoenix Police Department informed him that the investigation into Emma's attempted kidnapping had revealed connections to a larger criminal organization that specifically targeted wealthy individuals and their associates. The detective's warning was clear and unsettling. William's heroic intervention had made him a person of interest to the same criminal network that had targeted Emma. His association with her was now a matter of public record, and the criminals he had thwarted might view him as either a threat to be eliminated or a tool to be used in future attempts to reach Emma. The safety he had worked so hard to provide for Sophie was now potentially compromised by his decision to get involved. The irony was bitter and immediate. William had saved Emma from danger, but in doing so, he had potentially exposed his own daughter to the same criminal elements that threatened wealthy families like the Rodriguez clan. The simple life he had built for Sophie, focused on school, art, and their close relationship, was now complicated by security concerns that he had no resources to address. As he tucked Sophie into bed that night, listening to her excited plans for her first foundation class, William struggled with the growing realization that accepting Emma's help might require sacrifices he wasn't prepared to make. The criminal investigation would likely involve ongoing police interviews, potential courtroom testimony, and the constant awareness that dangerous people might be watching their daily routines. The foundation scholarship that had seemed like an answered prayer just hours earlier now felt like a golden handcuff that connected them to a world of wealth and danger they were unprepared to navigate. William's protective instincts as a father warred with his desire to provide Sophie with every possible opportunity, creating an internal conflict that kept him awake long into the night. The week that followed brought a series of increasingly uncomfortable reminders that their lives were now intertwined with circumstances beyond their control. William's supervisor at the mall received calls from reporters seeking interviews about the heroic security guard who had saved a prominent businesswoman. Emma's corporate security team began conducting regular sweeps of the parking garage where William worked, treating his workplace as a potential crime scene that required ongoing monitoring. Most troubling of all were the subtle signs that their apartment complex was being watched. William noticed the same vehicles parked in different locations on consecutive days, and his neighbor Jake mentioned seeing unfamiliar men asking questions about William's schedule and family situation. The peaceful anonymity that had protected Sophie throughout her childhood was being systematically eroded by forces beyond their control. The crisis reached its peak when Sophie's school principal called to inform William that a man claiming to be a family friend had attempted to sign Sophie out of class early, providing detailed information about her artistic abilities and her recent enrollment in an exclusive foundation program. The school's security protocols had prevented the incident from escalating, but the implication was terrifying and crystal clear. The criminal network that had targeted Emma was now using Sophie as a potential leverage point, exploiting the family connection that had developed through William's heroic actions. The very scholarship and opportunities that Emma had provided were being used by criminals to identify and track an 8-year-old girl whose only crime was being related to their primary target. That night, as William sat at his kitchen table staring at Sophie's artwork scattered across the surface, he faced the most difficult decision of his life as a father. Protecting his daughter might require cutting all ties with Emma and the foundation, sacrificing Sophie's artistic development to preserve her physical safety. The choice between opportunity and security was tearing him apart, forcing him to question whether his moment of heroism in the parking garage had ultimately made their lives better or infinitely more dangerous. The emergency meeting in Emma's corporate boardroom felt more like a tribunal than a family discussion. William sat across from Emma at the polished mahogany table, acutely aware that his second-hand dress shirt and discount tie looked painfully out of place in the room where million-dollar decisions were made daily. Emma's security chief, a former FBI agent named Robert Chen, who shared William's surname but possessed an intimidating presence that William could never match, had just finished briefing them on the escalating threats. The criminal organization responsible for the attempted kidnapping had expanded their operations significantly since William's intervention. Intelligence reports indicated they were now actively surveilling multiple members of Emma's extended network, including business associates, foundation staff, and anyone connected to the parking garage incident. William's name and address had been discovered in communications intercepted by federal authorities, confirming their worst fears about Sophie's safety. Emma's face was pale as she absorbed the security briefing, her usual confident demeanor shaken by the realization that her gratitude toward William had inadvertently placed an innocent child in danger. The foundation scholarship that had seemed like such a positive development now appeared to be a glowing beacon that drew criminal attention directly to Sophie's location and daily routine. The board members who had questioned Emma's judgment regarding her security protocols were now demanding immediate action to distance the company from any liability associated with the ongoing investigation. David Park, who had initially seemed merely condescending, was now openly hostile about the complications that William's heroism had created for the company's carefully managed public image. William listened to the corporate discussions with growing anger and frustration, realizing that Sophie's welfare was being weighed against business considerations and stock prices. The men and women around the table spoke about his daughter as if she were a liability to be managed rather than a child whose safety should be their primary concern. Emma's attempts to advocate for continued support were being systematically overruled by practical considerations that prioritized corporate interests over family obligations. The breaking point came when David suggested that the foundation should quietly withdraw Sophie's scholarship and terminate all contact with William's family to minimize the company's exposure to ongoing criminal investigations. The suggestion was presented as a reasonable business decision, but William heard it as the wealthy family's familiar pattern of discarding inconvenient relatives when they became problematic. William's response was immediate and uncompromising. He stood up from the conference table, his voice carrying the quiet intensity of a man who had reached his limit of patience with people who measured human relationships in terms of financial risk and public relations consequences. He told the assembled executives exactly what he thought of their priorities and their willingness to abandon an 8-year-old girl to protect their corporate reputation. Emma's reaction to William's outburst surprised everyone in the room, including William himself. Instead of supporting her board's practical recommendations, she stood beside him and declared that the foundation would not only continue supporting Sophie, but would also provide whatever security measures were necessary to ensure her safety. The decision was delivered with the kind of executive authority that brooked no argument, even from senior board members. The corporate rebellion that followed Emma's declaration was swift and coordinated. Within hours of the boardroom confrontation, William received a call from his supervisor at the mall, informing him that his employment was being terminated due to the ongoing police investigation and the security risks associated with his continued presence at the facility. The official reason cited liability concerns and the need to maintain a safe environment for shoppers and employees. The timing of William's termination was clearly not coincidental. Emma's board had demonstrated their ability to influence other business relationships, using their network of corporate connections to pressure William into accepting their preferred solution to the security crisis. The message was unmistakable: cooperate with their plan to distance himself from Emma, or face escalating consequences that would affect his ability to provide for Sophie. Emma's response to learning about William's job loss was immediate and decisive. She arrived at his apartment that evening with a formal offer of employment as her personal security consultant, a position that would provide a substantial salary increase while allowing him to work directly with professional security teams to protect both their families. The offer was generous and practical, but it also represented a complete transformation of William's independence and self-reliance. The conversation that followed was the most honest discussion William and Emma had ever shared about their family history and the social dynamics that had shaped their relationship. Emma acknowledged that her family had treated William poorly during his marriage to Maria, allowing their class prejudices to blind them to his character and dedication as a husband and father. She admitted that her previous indifference toward Sophie had been inexcusable, driven by the same elitist attitudes that had made William feel unwelcome at family gatherings. William's response was equally candid about his own resentments and insecurities regarding Emma's wealth and social position. He had always felt judged and found wanting by the Rodriguez family standards, leading him to maintain emotional distance even when opportunities for connection were available. The parking garage incident had forced both of them to see past their preconceptions, but changing established patterns of interaction would require ongoing effort from both sides. The security consultation position Emma offered came with conditions that would fundamentally alter William and Sophie's daily routine. They would need to relocate to a secure residential facility where professional protection could be provided around the clock. Sophie would attend a private school with enhanced security measures, and their movements would be coordinated with Emma's security team to minimize exposure to potential threats. The lifestyle changes required by the security arrangement would provide Sophie with educational opportunities that exceeded even the foundation scholarship, but they would also eliminate the independence and privacy that had defined William's approach to single parenthood. Every decision about Sophie's activities, from art classes to playground visits, would need to be evaluated through the lens of security protocols and threat assessment. William's internal struggle with Emma's offer reflected deeper questions about identity, pride, and parental responsibility that had no clear answers. Accepting the position would solve their immediate financial problems and provide Sophie with unprecedented opportunities for artistic development, but it would also make them permanently dependent on Emma's generosity and subject to the ongoing security concerns that came with associating with wealthy targets. The alternative of declining Emma's help and attempting to manage the security threats independently seemed equally problematic. William's savings were insufficient to relocate or provide private security, and his employment prospects had been damaged by the criminal investigation and his sudden termination from the mall. Protecting Sophie might require sacrifices that would ultimately limit her future opportunities even more than the current security restrictions. Sophie's own reaction to the proposed changes was characteristically direct and perceptive. At 8 years old, she understood that the family was facing serious problems, but she was more concerned about maintaining her relationship with her father than about the luxurious accommodations or educational advantages that Emma was offering. Her primary question was whether accepting help would mean that William would still be her primary caregiver and decision-maker. The week that followed Emma's offer was filled with increasingly urgent reminders that delaying a decision was itself a choice with potentially dangerous consequences. Detective Martinez called with updates about the criminal investigation that suggested the threats against both families were escalating rather than diminishing. Federal authorities were now involved in the case, treating it as part of a larger organized crime investigation that could take months or years to resolve. The pressure from Emma's corporate board intensified as well, with several members threatening to call for her removal as CEO if she continued to prioritize personal relationships over business interests. The foundation's other programs were being affected by the negative publicity, with donors expressing concerns about supporting an organization that had become associated with criminal investigations and security incidents. William's decision was ultimately made not by careful analysis of the various options, but by a phone call from Sophie's school reporting another suspicious incident involving an unauthorized adult attempting to gain information about her schedule and activities. The pattern of escalating surveillance had reached the point where Sophie's normal childhood activities were no longer safely possible without professional security support. That evening, as William tucked Sophie into bed in what might be their last night in the modest apartment that had been their home for 3 years, he made the choice that would transform their lives forever. He would accept Emma's offer not because he was comfortable with the dependence it represented, but because Sophie's safety had to take priority over his pride and his desire for independence. The conversation with Emma that finalized their arrangement was conducted over secure phone lines, with both of them acknowledging that they were embarking on an unprecedented experiment in blending family obligation with professional necessity. The success of their new relationship would depend on their ability to navigate the complex dynamics of wealth, security, and family loyalty, while protecting an 8-year-old girl whose artistic talents had inadvertently made her a target in a dangerous adult world. As William began packing their belongings for the move to the secure residential facility, he couldn't help but reflect on how dramatically his life had changed since that evening in the parking garage. His split-second decision to intervene in Emma's kidnapping had set in motion a series of events that had cost him his job, threatened his daughter's safety, and forced him to accept a level of dependence on wealthy relatives that contradicted everything he had believed about self-reliance and personal dignity. 2 years later, William stood in the sunlit conservatory of their new home, watching Sophie demonstrate advanced painting techniques to a group of young artists from the Foundation's outreach program. The secure residential compound had evolved into something neither he nor Emma had initially envisioned, becoming a genuine community where protection and opportunity coexisted naturally. The security measures that had once felt restrictive had gradually become invisible background elements that allowed real life to flourish. Sophie attended the prestigious Meridian Academy, where her artistic talents were nurtured alongside strong academic foundations, but she spent her afternoons teaching younger children in the Foundation's expanded youth programs. Her natural empathy and teaching abilities had transformed her from scholarship recipient to mentor, creating a leadership role that no amount of money could have purchased. William's position as Emma's security consultant had evolved into something more complex and satisfying than either of them had anticipated. His practical experience and genuine concern for people's welfare provided perspectives that traditional corporate security firms couldn't offer. The criminal organization that had initially threatened their families had been systematically dismantled by federal authorities, but William's role had expanded to include comprehensive safety planning for all Foundation programs and facilities. Emma's relationship with both William and Sophie had deepened into authentic family bonds that transcended their complicated beginning. She attended Sophie's art exhibitions with the pride of a devoted aunt, and her conversations with William had developed into the kind of easy friendship that neither had experienced with anyone else. The corporate board that had once questioned her judgment now recognized that her personal investment in family relationships had actually strengthened her leadership effectiveness. The Foundation's youth programs had flourished under their collaborative management, with William's understanding of working-class families helping to identify and support talented children who might otherwise never access quality artistic education. Sophie's story had become an inspiration for other young artists, demonstrating that exceptional talent could emerge from any background when combined with dedicated support and genuine opportunity. The most surprising development had been William's discovery of his own artistic abilities during the long hours he spent in the Foundation studios while Sophie attended classes. Emma had encouraged him to explore ceramics and sculpture, and his work had shown enough promise to warrant inclusion in several local exhibitions. The creative outlet had provided him with a deeper understanding of Sophie's passion, while giving him his own identity within the artistic community they had joined. Their modest apartment in Willow Creek had been replaced by a spacious home within the secure compound, but William had insisted on maintaining the same values and family traditions that had defined their relationship. Sophie still did her homework at the kitchen table, still shared daily conversations about her day, and still looked to her father as her primary source of guidance and support. The evening routine that brought their transformed lives into perspective occurred each night after dinner, when the three of them would gather in the living room to work on art projects or discuss Sophie's latest creations. These moments felt completely natural despite their extraordinary circumstances, proving that authentic family connections could flourish in any environment when built on genuine love and mutual respect. Emma had learned that true wealth came not from accumulating money or status, but from investing in relationships that created lasting meaning and positive impact. William had discovered that accepting help didn't diminish his value as a father, but rather expanded his ability to provide Sophie with opportunities that reflected her exceptional potential. Sophie had gained not just artistic training and educational advantages, but the security of knowing that she was supported by a family that valued her character as much as her talents. The parking garage incident that had brought them together now seemed like destiny rather than coincidence, a moment when courage and compassion had created possibilities that none of them could have imagined alone. Their story had become proof that the most important victories in life weren't achieved through individual brilliance or wealth, but through the willingness to see past surface differences and build something meaningful together. As William watched Sophie guide her young students through their first watercolor techniques, he realized that saving Emma from kidnappers had been the simplest part of their journey. The real achievement had been learning to trust each other enough to create a family that honored everyone's strengths while providing the security and support that allowed each of them to flourish. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.